Welcome, everyone, to the MMA Vivisection, the Ben Affleck-themed MMA Vivisection this week, since we've just been talking about Armageddon for some reason. I don't even remember how we got there. I think it was the proto-fascist film career of Michael Bay. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
We were talking about the fascistic and conservative mindset that seems to run thematically through all of Michael Bay's films. And
it's an important point. So I'm glad that we addressed it. And otherwise, we are here to talk about UFC Fortaleza. And I'm also turning the Vivisection on public because I forgot. So if you're just now seeing that it's public and not unlisted, now you know. Anyway, we are here to talk about this Fortaleza card this week, and it's, this sucks because I don't even want to say it, because I was like last week, I was like, UFC 209 is such a fucking great card. I'm so excited for this. And then it just had the guts ripped out of it. It was still a fun card, mostly.
It was a very good card. The main event was just a huge letdown, but
yeah.
Really, it wasn't even the main event that we were looking forward to most. It was the co-main that we lost. But
exactly, and that was why that's why it felt like the guts were really ripped out, because the fight that is still one of the best potential fights to book in the entire sport, it didn't happen. Like, it was supposed to happen a week ago, and that still hurts. It still hurts my heart.
But as far as matchmaking is concerned, this card has a lot of the same promise with these well-matched undercard fights. We got a couple highlights, and so lacking a really big name fight, all we really need is maybe one of those Darren Elkins versus Mirsad Bektic type moments to make this a really, really enjoyable card.
Yeah, there are a couple of fights on this undercard, I will admit, where I'm just a little bit like, this dude's going down there to get killed, right? But yeah, only one or two, not too many of the kind of Brazilian matchmaking that fans have often accused the UFC of more than is actually, I think, the case. So we're just going to dive right in and dive into a middleweight bout. Gareth McClellan versus Paulo Henrique Costa, or Paulo Porrachina.
It's a fight. It's not one of the ones on the card that you should be really excited for necessarily, but it'll probably be a fun scrap because Gareth McClellan, for all of his flaws, always shows up to throw down and has actually put on some good performances in the UFC due to that quality, more than anything else. I wouldn't say that Gareth McClellan is really very strong in any particular position or with any particular skill set. Maybe you could say his ground and pound is pretty solid. When he's in open space, he's okay in the clinch, although not when he's being held against the fence necessarily. Couple of highlights, but mostly Gareth McClellan is just a gamer. He does not go away or accept defeat very easily. And so that makes him a really good test for Paulo Henrique Costa, who is probably the fighter with a lot more upside here. Costa is, what's his age?
He's like 24.
Yeah, he's very young. I know that. 24 sounds about right. Paulo Costa, around 24 years old. Both looks and fights a lot like an Uberim era Overeem, like a very thickly muscled, powerful guy, likes to close people down and pressure. I do get the feeling that he's probably vulnerable to being pressured himself because he does tend to jump out of range and cover up whenever somebody does fire back. I get the feeling, even though we haven't seen it turned around on him yet, that he's kind of a bully. But he is also, an accurate, precise, and powerful striker. And Gareth McClellan typically needs to survive a bit of a thrashing before he can start working that comeback game. So there's a chance that Costa, who is only first-round finishes throughout his 8 professional fights, does not get McClellan out of there and gasses, in which case McClellan will have a serious shot at winning this just by overwhelming him down the stretch. But more likely, I think Costa catches McClellan with something really good in the first round and TKOs him.
Yeah, Costa's one of those fighters where, like, if you only watch his offensive clips, like when he's punching people, he looks fucking amazing. Like the combinations he's throwing, the nice little like body head kick combination, stuff like that. Just fantastic on point offensive fighter. Then if you watch only the defensive clips, you're like, oh my God, this guy is probably going to get knocked out a couple times.
Right. Against somebody who does have that advantage,
Yeah,
it would be a really big problem.
Yeah.
Somebody who can defend.
I really like the Uberim comparison because, man, that feels exactly right. He feels like a bully with beach muscles. And that I think it will be enough to get him by McClellan because McClellan, he is tough, but he's not that tough. He still can be knocked out. He still can be finished. You just kind of have to go after him to do it. And Costa will go after him. And otherwise, McClellan's just really bad at controlling fights. Even when he can stay in it, even when he can make it a good scrap, even when he can make it a hard fight, he can't control it. He can't.
He's always hanging in there. You know?
He can never keep top position. He can never, keep the clinch and hold a guy up without getting taken down. He can never maintain range without falling into the clinch. He's just, anything he does, he's totally susceptible to being taken over in that position.
He's the true actualization, the realization of Phil McKenzie's blue-collar scrapper, and therefore a perfect middleweight.
Yeah.
I mean, he belongs in this division.
He does. Costa he may be one of the technical kickboxers who aren't.
Yeah, I think he fits into that category pretty nicely. Also, I think we have, is it power punchers with poor stamina or something like that, I believe is another one of the archetypes.
Might be. But anyway, Costa should take this. He looks like a top flight athlete. So far, he's been durable, and I think durable enough to stand up to what McClellan will deliver. And the only question is whether he'll gas badly because dude has some serious beach muscles going on. Odds on that fight, Costa is the favorite opening -210 out to -278. And McClellan opening at +160 out to +224. I'm not saying McClellan's worth a bet at those odds, but Costa does not deserve that much. He doesn't deserve to be around -300. He still has a lot to prove. He's got a pretty good regional record, I'll say. He's actually not facing bad competition on his way to the UFC.
He's faced a few guys with winning records and more than 10 fights. So
so he should be ready for this level, but with his defense and with his musculature and first round KO record, there's every chance he falls apart after a round. So if the odds keep getting wider, McClellan might be worth a chance bet.
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe. It makes me nervous, but perhaps if they get significantly wider.
Yeah, just because Costa is getting overhyped. Here, he's getting too generous in the odds.
The odds do not accurately reflect the fight as I see it, but that is not always a cue to immediately go ahead and bet because you still got to consider who you're betting on.
Exactly. McClellan is not a dude who like I said, he doesn't take over a fight anywhere. There's no part of a fight in which he can dominate. He just can't. I mean, even against guys, unless he's got a massive strength or durability advantage, it just is not happening. He's going to be in a close fight even if he's winning.
Yep. So there's our traditional talking too long about the first fight of the night out of the way.
All right. That brings us to Honey Jason, Jeremy Kennedy. Jeremy Kennedy got a lot of hype coming out of the Canadian circuit. I think partially that was a lot due to there maybe not being a lot of tape on him, and him potentially him winning basically. He's a fighter. I have a feeling he's one of those dudes that people are a lot of local reporters and media in the area is like, oh, this guy's the next big thing.
That Gavin Tucker hype. You never know whether to trust it or not.
Exactly. And in Kennedy's case, I don't trust it. I don't think he's nearly physical enough to implement the kind of game that he has, which is very much he likes to be a slick counterpuncher on the feet, and then he wants to be a takedown machine who just out-grapples people constantly. And we saw in his first fight against Alexander Ricci, he was not able to get takedowns or create any offense when he did get takedowns because he's not physical enough. He doesn't have that dynamic physicality to actually make that game work in the UFC. And I think Hani Jason is exactly the kind of guy to not be physical enough against. So I think Hani Jason may not knock him out if he's tough enough, but will probably have a dominant win unless he just gets caught in a crazy sub somehow.
Yeah, I mean, Kennedy earned some points by pretty much controlling Alex Ricci, who's a lightweight when he is a career featherweight himself, but he also did have to struggle really hard to get Ricci down in that fight and used a lot of energy in the process. It didn't really have the feeling of somebody who is going to, at featherweight, easily get people down to the ground, especially not quick, explosive athletes. With Hani Jason he may not be the world's best takedown defender, but he is explosive and quick, and he's also extremely aggressive with how he counters things. And I think that ability to athletically like drive through and just take him off his feet, that's necessary if you want to out wrestle Hani Jason. You got to be Dennis Bermudez with these clean shots and hard slams and finishing in dominant positions, because if you're not Dennis Bermudez, then you are Damon Jackson or Mike Wilkinson, people who get in Hani Jason's face, don't take him down, and then get flying triangled or guillotined or run into a flying knee on their way in. So, yeah, I think Kennedy will probably have some moments in this fight just because he's so aggressive and likes to get after his opponent. He'll probably tie Hani Jason up at some points, but I do think that Jason will ultimately find a submission.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this matchup. I don't really understand it. Jason's the kind of dude who's like perennially going to be floating. He's a gatekeeper to the top 15 in this division. He's a dude that if you beat him, you are a ranked featherweight. And Jeremy Kennedy is a kid who is, barely scraping by at the very early stages of his UFC career. It does not seem...
You could view it. I mean, how old is Kennedy? He's 24. Yeah, it seems a little too soon for Kennedy, to be honest. I would say it's basically a trial by fire kind of fight where either Hani Jason gets a win and then retains his status as gatekeeper, or Jeremy Kennedy, gets off the pot and wins. But it doesn't seem the right time to force that question on Jeremy Kennedy's career.
No, I mean, Hani Jason's lost to Dennis Bermudez, Robbie Peralta, Jeremy Stevens, and then, you're going back to like Janeer Da Silva and Henan Barao early in his career. And even Robbie Peralta was actually a really ridiculous athlete. That was kind of how Robbie Peralta survived at featherweight.
And it was a split decision.
So people who beat Hani Jason tend to have to be better athletes than him.
Yeah. And
that does not look like Jeremy Kennedy. Odds on that fight. Wow. Hani Jason opened at -110, went up to +100, near +100, or to -101, and is now down at -111. And Jeremy Kennedy opened at -130 and is now up to -111. I don't know why you wouldn't bet on Hani Jason at even odds.
Sure. You might even consider betting on him to finish, because 13 of his 14 wins, when he does win, are finishes, and you can get him inside the distance at +180.
Yeah, I mean, it's also worth noting that, other than getting head kick knocked out by Jeremy Stevens, Hani Jason hasn't, his only finishes, times he's lost by finish, were a doctor stoppage and getting stomped out in Brazil when he was really early in his career. Hani Jason is tough as nails.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeremy Kennedy will not only have to be able to outmuscle him, but probably have to do it for 15 minutes. It doesn't make sense to me. Those are some pretty bad odds. I don't like. I'm pretty shocked at that. I realized that Honey Jason hasn't technically won recently, but he beat the piss out of Damon Jackson and then tested positive for PED. So
for a diuretic, yeah.
For a diuretic. So yeah, it's not like he actually, it's not like he hasn't had a good performance lately.
No.
All right, and that brings us to the FS1 card. Michel Prazeres, Josh Burkman.
Note how Michel Prazeres and Francisco Trinaldo have just enough room between their fights to maintain plausible deniability that they are not, in fact, the same dude.
It's true.
They're very similar in a lot of ways. It's just like Francisco Trinaldo switches to Orthodox, and he's Michel Prazeres. These two super muscular, aging Brazilians who kind of got their names as grinders early in the UFC, but have really gotten the job done with their striking more often than not. Both of whom are on a decent win streak. Michel Prazeres' last win over Gilbert Burns, very impressive. He looked really good in that fight.
Impressive.
Yeah, a very solid win. Like not even just like used his veteran savvy to eke out a decision. I mean, he clearly beat Gilbert Burns, and so that goes a long way towards. He's near the top 10 now, I would say. Josh Burkman, I think a perfectly fine fight for Prazeres. The UFC does not seem keen about throwing Prazeres / Trinaldo into these really upper level matchups. They want to give them like all these test fights that they have to pass. But I would say Burkman represents like a final test before you step up. And I think Prazeres is right at that point right now. He's just beaten a good prospect. He beat a couple of other guys who are, like veteran / journeyman. Now he gets to beat like a gatekeeper style journeyman, a journeyman who has been to the top of the mountain a few times. So can he outstrike Josh Burkman? Because he's probably not going to out-wrestle him consistently. I don't think that Prazeres has always been very great with his control on the ground, being this stocky little dude that he is. But he can hit some nice takedowns. And he is at the very least active. And I think that is his edge over Burkman. I would not at all be surprised if Josh Burkman cracked him with a left-hand counter coming in and hurt him. Prazeres does not have great defense, and Burkman is accurate and powerful. And Burkman is really good when he knows what he's doing. But we have said this many times over. He has this bizarre habit of like getting caught up in his own options where he's just cycling through different things he can try rather than hitting upon the thing that clearly works and sticking with it and figuring out different ways to make those techniques work. And this is whether that means, he'll throw a left hand and land and then stop throwing it. But it also means he'll have success pressuring and then just decide to pull back and counter, or he'll have success in the counter and then he'll decide to plant his feet and trade. It's always just, you never know what you're going to get from Burkman. And the only time I can think of in recent memory where he had a performance in which he stuck to a game plan consistently was that KJ Noons fight. And it was a pretty dull fight. The first round of that fight was one of the worst first rounds I have seen in MMA. Right. And so I think maybe that's why Burkman doesn't stick to game plans, because he doesn't want a boring fight. But it also means that he's like diving in on takedowns when he has Dong Hyun Kim hurt against the fence. You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing, Josh? Just do what works. So I think Prazeres is going to beat him, because what Prazeres has to me is, even though he's not a finisher, he has this feeling of killer instinct about him where, or maybe you just call it competitive instinct, where it's really hard to get over on Michel Prazeres without him immediately piling on and getting you back. And Josh Burkman doesn't do that. Josh Burkman has killer instinct when his opponent's hurt, but offense often causes him to shut down. Whereas Prazeres does not allow you to get away with hitting him cleanly. That was a big part of how he beat Gilbert Burns, when Burns was doing really well striking with him in the beginning. And I think he'll have a similar result on Burkman, where at some point in this fight, he will catch him or scare him a little bit and then start to take over. So I'm going with Michel Prazeres by decision.
Yeah, I would actually be pretty surprised if Burkman won this fight, frankly.
I would too. Yeah. I mean, if it was like a one big moment thing, Burkman's a good finisher. He has those. Prazeres is probably fighting a little past his pay grade at this point. Like he's not a Prazeres is not the picture of a perfect contender. You know what I mean? There are still obvious holes in what he does. So there are openings for veteran Burkman, but veteran Burkman doesn't show up the way we expect him to.
Yeah, I mean, Burkman's last win was a KO of Tyler Stinson in March 2014, Stinson is not the fighter Prazeres is even.
Yeah, I mean, even I'm thinking of like the John Fitch fight, but that was quite a while ago at this point.
That was 2013, and
yeah, it's been a while since he's like stung somebody and then immediately finished them.
Yeah, Prazeres, like this wouldn't even be the worst loss on Burkman's record now that he's lost to Zach Otto. It's just Prazeres' biggest problem, I think, has been generally that he's just too small to be a real lightweight. That comes down to the control thing. He actually he's always had a nicely fluid game where he would hit a power, like a big power overhand right into a double leg, right into top control, right into mount, and then suddenly you're 5'6", and that's actually kind of a problem.
Mm-hmm. He's got like the alpha male grappling game. I think Prazeres would be really good if he just went and did some training with the alpha male guys, like learning to turn those quick little positions into guillotines and stuff like that would actually probably be really helpful for him.
The big thing that we've seen, I think, in the Gilbert Burns fight is that he's fixed his cardio because he's got decent timing and power on his strikes. And like you say, he's got that great knack for you hit him, he'll just come right back. And I mean, that's what's gotten him, that kind of attitude has gotten him wins over dudes like Mairbek Taisimov. Like he is tough and aggressive when you don't even think he will be.
Yeah.
And the big step forward has been that he now doesn't get tired late. So he can make a fight hard on you, and he can keep after you for round after round. And
I think some of it is experience too. I mean, we can talk about this more with Trinaldo, but both of these guys are obviously prone to gassing because of the way they fight and how they're built. And we have seen both of them get tired in the later rounds. But I think really the big thing is that fatigue makes cowards of us all. You don't have to necessarily get rid of fatigue if you can just change your response to it. And so there are a lot of fighters who get tired and still maintain their work rate, still stay dangerous, still stay calm and find their openings. And that's what I saw from Prazeres in that last fight with Burns. It's not necessarily that he wasn't more tired in the third round than he was in the first. Granted, he did come in overweight, so maybe that helped that he didn't cut the full weight, but that he was just okay with getting tired, whereas before it would really have a visible impact on how he carried himself.
Yeah. So I would be pretty surprised if Burkman won this fight. He would have to fight a lot differently than he has lately.
It would need to be a blast from the past.
Yep. Burkman is the underdog, opening at plus 165, now to plus 203. Prazeres, the favorite, opening at minus 215, now to minus 252. I think those odds are pretty fine, pretty solid. They could even be a little wider for my taste, just because I don't trust Burkman to win any fights right now. So unless he's fighting somebody that's really just not good at all, I would not pick him for most fights.
Yeah.
The dude who fought Zach Otto does not beat many people in the UFC today.
True. It still doesn't seem like a super bettable fight, just in case. Because
no, it doesn't.
The line, I think, reflects the matchup accurately, and so that means no bet.
That brings us to a bantamweight bout, Rani Yahya versus Joe Soto. I am really split on this fight.
Yeah.
I am mostly split because I do not understand quite how Rani Yahya wins fights.
He's awesome, isn't he? He's the best.
Because he doesn't strike very well at all.
An overstatement. Understatement.
He's not a particularly great wrestler in terms of being a takedown artist. But he seems to fool people into the idea that he is a really great wrestler. And not just fooling them like, oh, I'm so worried about his wrestling that I'll let him hit me really hard, which he does a lot. He manages to hit people in most of his fights, like club people in most of his fights, just because they're so concerned about getting taken down.
Some like stiff-ass high kick or some awkward flailing right hand.
Yeah, just like that. And suddenly, somebody's rocking. You're like, what the hell is this? But he also just seems to trick people into thinking that he's a really good wrestler when he's in on the takedown. It's like, oh, Rani Yahya has got a hold of me. I guess I'll just fall over.
I think he is a pretty good wrestler. He just doesn't have the approach that we usually associate with dominant wrestling. He sucks at getting the first shot.
He does.
But so does Damian Maia, and Damian Maia gets everybody down.
It's true.
There's a little bit of that Maia like drag and strangle game where Yahya will just, I mean, I noticed this a lot in his last fight. He will just lock hands around someone's waist and you just won't let go.
Yeah.
And he'll drag you backwards and then drag you the other way. And they're not pretty takedowns, but he gets a position like a Kimura or an omoplata or a rear waist cinch that is just a strong control position and just anchors onto it until he gets you where he wants you.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, it's just like people kind of, he gets on people and they're like, well, I'm trapped now, you know? And I mean,
time for the fight to get boring.
Yeah, and part of me thinks that Joe Soto should absolutely be able to win this fight. He should be able to outstrike Rani Yahya. He should be able to hang with him on the ground for periods. I mean, Rani Yahya is also a fighter, like, if you can get position on Rani Yahya, he'll kind of just give it to you. Like, he will just kind of go away for stretches of a fight. You know, there's a reason that he lost to Tom Ninamaki and that he can drop these fights is that he lost early to Matthew Lopez. And it's just like, he can be pushed off of that game, but he'll come back with it the next round. So if you're not ready, you know, the moment you let up on him, he will be right there back doing the same stuff. And the truth of it probably is that Joe Soto is just a little too small and a little too, I mean, he's not way smaller than Rani Yahya, frankly, but a little too inconsistent for me to trust him to beat Rani Yahya. Like, I really feel like
come
Joe
around
Soto,
to the Yahya side.
I really feel like Soto should win this fight because he's more active and engaged in every part of the fight and less liable to just kind of check out in the ways Rani Yahya does. Like, Rani Yahya always seems tired and like he would rather not be fighting this fight right now, you know?
He's awesome. He's always exhausted like 3 minutes into the fight.
He's always exhausted and he's like dripping sweat.
He's great.
Just seems like, you know, he's on top of a guy and he's just like, I don't want to do, like, okay, I'm just going to hold this and you don't go anywhere and then I don't have to fight. And that can be the fight.
He's on a very respectable 4-fight winning streak. Right? He's great.
I think Soto will probably give him that fight. I get this feeling. I want to see Soto win, but Soto, he's the physical side of the game. Even when he's doing well, it just always seems to be a question. And he fights. He can be flighty. He can get overwhelmed in moments. He's good at battling back, but he doesn't always battle back. So I'm going to pick Yahya and hope to see Soto take over.
Yeah, we both were discussing before the show began how Joe Soto is this guy where you know exactly what he does, where he's good. You always feel compelled when a fight of his is coming up to go back and watch a lot of his recent fights to try and figure out like how he matches up with anyone, because it's always a hard fight for Joe Soto.
Yeah.
He has not had an easy bout in the UFC. Even the last fight that he won pretty well over, Marco Beltran, he got a quick heel hook. That's basically his only easy win in the UFC.
Even for that fight, it was Marco Beltran looking reasonably dangerous, and then Soto shooting, getting totally sprawled on, and rolling for a heel hook and getting it.
A beautiful finishing sequence, but not one that inspires a lot of hope against high-level competition, especially not against someone like Rani Yahya, who at this point seems pretty unsubmittable.
Yeah.
So the thing is that Joe Soto, I think, doesn't have the confidence he should have on the feet because he doesn't have a great chin. And we were saying before, he fights like he doesn't have a great chin, whereas other guys who can be cracked don't necessarily, like Edson Barboza and Beneil Dariush, two guys with not great chins who have learned to fight like their chin is not a problem, and it has made them harder to hurt and harder to put away. And such is not the case with Joe Soto. Joe Soto looks anxious when he's getting caught in an exchange or whatever. He doesn't look that confident in his hands. The most confident he's ever looked in his hands was in the TJ Dillashaw fight because he had nothing to lose. And I think, too, that second most confident he's looked in the UFC was against Chris Beal in the third round because, again, he had nothing to lose. It would have been his fourth loss in a row, and he was losing the fight up to that point. So he just decided to throw all caution to the wind and go after Chris Beal. I don't yet have faith that he can do that against everybody. He may have found that that's his new thing, is just to swarm people. And if he does, he might have a really good shot against Yahya. But he still strikes me as this guy who's going to work hard everywhere. And Yahya works really hard in just one thing. Yahya has what we always talk about grappling focused fighters needing, which is a super specific focus on getting the fight to his face. And Joe Soto throws a lot of naked low kicks, and he covers up high, and he doesn't really tend to throw enough volume to hurt a guy like Yahya early. So I think what we'll see is like a very low grade version of Michael Johnson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, except that Soto will be more dangerous once taken down. The problem is that Soto, both of these guys are happy to be aggressive on the ground, but Yahya is always aggressive in like a very traditional hierarchical way, advancing from position to position, letting you create the openings for submissions. And he does most of this after making a sincere effort to get to top position. Joe Soto is aggressive, but totally content to be put on his back. And that does not bode well against Yahya, who, again, seems pretty unsubmittable at this point in his career. So I am also going with Yahya. I don't think it's an easy pick by any means because Joe Soto he's a spoiler in many ways, but I'm going to go with Yahya by decision.
It's also the battle of dudes who are way younger than you think they are.
Yahya is not 50 years old?
Yahya is 32. And Joe Soto is 29.
Is he really? Joe Soto is such an old veteran at this point.
He does. He seems like this completely weathered vet. His career only really started in earnest back in 2008. He took one fight in 2006, but it's just that he won the Bellator title so early that you immediately remember him from like 2009, 2010.
Yeah, Yahya has been fighting since 2002, so he is definitely a certified old vet, even if he's only 32 years old. Yeah.
Odds on this fight: Joe Soto or Yahya is the favorite, opening at minus 175, now at minus 166. Joe Soto, the underdog, opening at plus 135, now to plus 140. I think that's about right. I wouldn't even mind seeing those odds get a little bit closer, but I think Yahya deserves to be a slight favorite, basically. That brings us to a welterweight bout: Sergio Moraes versus Davi Ramos, and a fight that I really like.
How happy are you to see Sergio Moraes back in the octagon?
I'm always really happy to see the Panther back in the cage.
He's turned into a special class of mixed martial artists since I think it was a knee injury he had, right? He actually had a series of injuries that were hampering him until about 2015. I think he's had now 3 fights in a row without an injury, which is a good sign, but it does seem to suggest that he's changed something in the way he approaches fights, and his fights certainly don't look the way they used to.
No.
Moraes does not seem confident in just grinding and driving through for takedowns very much anymore. Does a lot more striking. He's not bad at it. He's kind of like, is he from Evolução Tai?
It was just on his page. He is from, he is.
So same gym as Trinaldo, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me because we have two guys who don't necessarily look like they've benefited from a lot of specific technical instruction, but both of whom clearly know what they're doing with the tools that they have at their disposal. So Moraes has a decent jab. He's pretty good at setting up that winging overhand right, and he will follow it with a truly bizarre slapping left hook when the opening presents itself. He's moves his head in kind of weird ways, and he tends to stay pretty mobile on his feet. And so he's very much like he's got a Keith Jardine kind of thing going on where he's got this awkward timing from outside and he'll just jump in and he will hurt people with his strikes. He can do it. He is a super decorated jiu-jitsu player, but has not necessarily shown up since those surgeries in MMA. And so that makes this fight particularly interesting because Davy Ramos did not reach the same heights as Moraes as a grappler, but came fairly close, did really well on the international grappling scene himself, and has been submitting people in MMA. And so we've got a jiu-jitsu master who doesn't really grapple all that much anymore, except when he's taken down, versus a guy who will seek to get top position and grapple him as much as possible. It's a really hard fight to call, actually. I'm going to go with Sergio Moraes. I think his takedown defense is generally pretty good. And the thing I've seen from Ramos is that his striking is like the same striking that Sergio Moraes used to have. He's very confident in the idea that he can take someone down and dominate them on the ground, and does a lot of like just sort of standing in place, staring, waiting, and then bombing someone with a big right hand. I don't think Moraes is going to fall for that at this point in his career. And so as long as this fight's on the feet, I think we will get to see more of that glorious, awkward Brazilian kickboxing from Moraes, and that he will bank some rounds doing that and will at least be able to survive on the ground, if not surprise Ramos with, again, what is truly a very good jiu-jitsu game.
Yeah, I'm actually picking Ramos here, and it's weird because I love Moraes, but I, especially watching Davi Ramos's, I believe it was his last fight. Let me see. Yeah, watching his last fight against Nick Piedmont in Phoenix Fighting Championship, he really looks like he is starting to understand the fundamentals of having a decent striking game. He just doesn't have any. He doesn't yet have the understanding of distance control at all. That's the big problem. Is it like he's actually got a good quick jab, and he'll even like double or triple up on it. He understands how to move his head, and he kicks really hard. But he'll then he'll jab a couple times, throw a low kick, and then all of his big punches are like this hook that is suddenly, it's like, dude, you realize you're 5'8". You need to actually step in a little more. And I think that'll come along for him eventually, but I also think it might be enough to keep Moraes tentative standing and to keep Moraes outside. And then I think Ramos has a really good, aggressive takedown, back take game built for MMA that's well designed for MMA. And a lot of what really worries me too is what I saw out of the Zach Otto fight was Moraes going for a lot of takedowns that he just couldn't get at all. And he eventually ended up hurting Otto standing and getting Otto down late in the third round, and he got Otto down in the first. But those were a lot of the deciding factors for him, was being able to like club and sprawl on Otto late and being able to get a really hard takedown early. And I think that Ramos may just be a little too slick and too fast, and his ground game a little too well built for MMA for Moraes to thrive there. And I think he's going to give Ramos the opportunities to get this to the ground, going for his own takedowns. So I'm actually going to take Ramos for the upset here, even though it's on short notice, which is not a great, not a great thing. And I think Moraes' game is, he's become a little overly reliant on functional but not great kickboxing.
Yeah, it's great to watch, though.
It is great to watch.
Knockout Sergio Moraes is the best Sergio Moraes.
It is. I love Sergio Moraes. I really do. I just think that this is a little too, I don't know. I think this is the wrong, I think this is going to be the wrong kind of matchup that plays into his own instincts too much, and that he's going to give Ramos too much on the ground and be too tentative standing.
Yeah, you may be right.
Odds on this fight, Sergio Moraes is coming in as a massive favorite, reasonably massive, rather. A decided favorite. How about that? Decided. That's a little more measured take. Opening at minus 210 out to minus 238. And Ramos, the underdog, +1, opening at plus 160 out to plus 196.
I think Ramos is worth a bet there.
I think so too. Even at his best, Sergio Moraes is not a dominating fighter.
I mean, we're talking split decision over Zach Otto, split decision loss, or was it a draw?
Split draw to Luan Chagas.
Who is a very, very raw.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moraes is, it tends to be still, you're right. I mean, sort of his success is sort of built on getting these big moments that may not stand out as much against a super athletic grappler like Ramos.
Yeah, I mean, his knockout of Omari Akhmedov was kind of a comeback.
Yep.
And the Michel Lebu fight, there were people who are arguing hard that Lebu won that fight. It was a unanimous decision, but it was not a good decision. Like it was not a solid decision. There was a lot of.
But Moraes belongs at middleweight. We can all agree. I mean, he is that class of fighter. He just never convincingly beats anyone who's good, but he still manages to put together an unbeaten streak that demands respect.
And, and Chagas and Otto are both really raw fighters that he barely squeaked by. So you're talking about in Ramos being raw, like that's not necessarily so Moraes should be a huge favorite here.
Yeah, no, he shouldn't be. No.
And Ramos has a much deeper skill set than Otto or Chagas.
Yeah, maybe not the kind that I think will necessarily work well against Moraes, but it's definitely, I mean, just looking at Ramos's abilities and Moraes' successes, it's got to be seen as a pick'em.
Yeah.
And not a, how do you ever strongly favor Sergio Moraes?
I don't know. I really don't. So, bet to be made on Ramos there. That brings us to a lightweight bout: Francisco Trinaldo versus Kevin Lee. I am feeling very. This is I don't know. I feel very split on this fight because I've kind of made up my mind about how I think it's going to go, but tape doesn't help me any. The kind of fights that both Trinaldo and Lee have had success in lately have almost nothing to do with the kind of fight that is in front of them now.
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing.
Normally when you're studying, you want to find like some recent stylistic parallels. Like who have they fought who reflects this opponent, and neither of them has any of that really.
Yeah, like Efrain Escudero, a lot of that fight was down to Escudero having the real problems, like just checking out for long period stretches of bouts.
Escudero, who's also very competitive with Kevin Lee for the early portions of that fight.
Yeah, who was very competitive and then has a bad habit of just kind of fading away. Escudero just kind of fades out of fights in a way that Trinaldo certainly does not. Mustafayev is one of those, like we were talking about with Paulo Henrique Costa earlier. You watch Mustafayev on offense and you're like, this guy is the next like king of fighters. And then you watch him on defense and it's like, dude, what are you doing?
I think that's a thing with a lot of the Sambo guys. Like Omari Akhmedov is similar. Like no restraint, all full power. Everything is geared towards like a 9-minute grappling match, or a 9-minute bout rather than a 15-minute war against someone who is better on you, better at defending than you are.
Yeah. And then with Jake Matthews is still a very rote striker who really had to fight Kevin Lee's fight and is not operating really in like angles or any kind of work to avoid it. And it also ended up looking like a really big physical advantage for Lee that Trinaldo, I don't know that he would have over Trinaldo. I mean, Matthews isn't a small lightweight, so it could just be that that Lee is becoming that much of a bully. But the Mustafayev fight didn't suggest that. Mustafayev, he got Mustafayev down, but a lot of that looked like it was down to Mustafayev having really bad takedown defense. So with Trinaldo on the other side, the last really good blast double takedown fighter that Trinaldo faced, Piotr Hallman, maybe?
I guess.
I guess.
The best takedown artist he's faced in his 7-fight win streak is probably Norman Park.
It'd be Michael Chiesa, and who has a very funky wrestling game that's unlike anybody else's.
Yeah.
Park is not a bad takedown artist, but mostly he's a great cage grinder who really wears on people.
Yeah, I will say that Felder's shown better instincts of getting back up after being taken, or Trinaldo has, but then how much of that has to do with the quality of his opponent's top games.
Yeah.
He's mostly facing strikers.
So the big thing that I think is, and part of this too, is that watching Trinaldo face Paul Felder, he spent a lot more time inside than I remembered in that fight. A lot more. Really clinching up with and trying to control Felder inside. Which is the thing that's going to serve Kevin Lee best. Like, that is what Kevin Lee needs a lot of, is Trinaldo in there trying to clinch with him.
But will Trinaldo do it?
Yeah, and that I don't know, because Trinaldo has also at times looked like he has really great distance and space management. And
he didn't clinch with guys like Chad Laprise and Yancy Medeiros. He just walked him into shots over and over.
So because I think Trinaldo is forming better plans to his particular opponents, I'm going to pick him here. I think he can manage space well, and Lee's striking is still not good, and he's still unfortunately overconfident in his defensive positioning. That is the biggest problem Kevin Lee has. You know, beyond just being not a very good striker, he really feels like the moment he steps an inch out of the pocket, he's like, okay, I can just put my hands down and chill. Like, I'm safe. I don't need to think about defense. I'm well outside of any area you can hit me. And I think that'll cost him against somebody who can really manage distance well and keep track of where the fight is and keep track of where he wants to be. So I think that'll give Trinaldo maybe even a TKO. But if Trinaldo does not manage distance well, then he could absolutely get taken down and ground out or even submitted by Lee.
Yeah, I think this also feels like a pick'em, and this is what Pat Wyman and I were saying in Heavy Hands, that the new era of the UFC has its problems. I think WME is really engendering some serious negative feelings, but the matchmaking on the undercard has been really good for the entire year so far. We've had basically all undercards have looked like this, where you don't necessarily have huge names or whatever, but the matchups all make very clear sense. And this is basically like we have two guys who are right on the cusp, both guys with good win streaks. Trinaldo's obviously maybe carries more weight than Lee's because he's been winning for such a long time now. But Lee has arguably beaten a couple of better fighters than Trinaldo, more established fighters maybe. So yeah, maybe that's iffy. But really the thing is that we have these two guys who have a very clear window of opportunity now to get into those top 10, top 5 matchups by beating each other here. And the matchup itself is perfectly designed to test them where both of them are probably weakest, because Kevin Lee almost certainly has a wrestling advantage over Trinaldo. Trinaldo's been fairly easy to take down for a guy with his build in the past. Again, he has scrambled back to his feet better in recent fights, but also he hasn't been fighting a ton of great wrestlers, so the problem may very well still be there. But he's also got, as you said, good distance management, very good movement, fights really well from the outside for a guy with his build. Does a great job of exploding across space and drawing opponents into traps and countering them and then angling off. He does all these things very intelligently, very well. Even with his crazy technique, the guys at Evolução Thai seem very good at designing styles that work for their fighters. And so Kevin Lee, who is pretty poor defensively, may actually be getting worse with his striking. I think I almost have this feeling that Kevin Lee has rededicated himself to wrestling and grappling because those are clearly what he's best at, and is now perhaps even more stiff and rote and hittable with his striking. Because you always get this feeling watching Kevin Lee that he's kind of running through a preset combination in his head, and then he stands there like waiting for the next cue on the pads. And when he's doing that is when his opponent nails him with a big shot. And that has happened in all of the recent fights he's been winning. And it has happened in the past and been the end of him, or at least led to a round that he loses. And Trinaldo can definitely land those shots. He may not be a super consistent knockout artist, but he hits very hard, either with his left hand or with his left kick, which will be an available weapon here. Although, again, does that give Kevin Lee an opportunity to get in on a leg and take Trinaldo down? So really, it's like an either-or matchup where whoever gets their game going wins. I have a feeling that Trinaldo is going to be a little too savvy for Kevin Lee and will really jump on those early openings the way he did against Chad Laprise, like draw him in and just try to nail him as quickly as possible. I think that'll probably work for him. But if Lee gets in on his hips and starts working his top game, I don't expect Trinaldo to be able to last as long as him or to easily get back up to his feet. So tough one. I'm going with Trinaldo by second round TKO. Totally a toss-up in my mind, though.
Yeah, I feel the same. Trinaldo opening as opening as the favorite, now an underdog, opening at minus 130, now up to plus 128. Lee opening as the underdog, or opening at even odds at minus 110, now out to minus 152. I don't really see a reason that Lee should be any kind of strong favorite over Trinaldo. So if that gap continues to widen, then Trinaldo might be worth something. But otherwise,
yeah. I get why he's a slight favorite. Like the way these two guys fight, I think MMA fans are more geared to appreciate the technical top control, the smothering of Kevin Lee, than they are the seemingly wild and aimless striking of Trinaldo that you really have to kind of study him to understand what he's doing. Like it doesn't look pretty enough to catch the eye, you know. He just looks like a brawler.
All right, on that note, that brings us to our main card and a welterweight battle, Alex Oliveira versus Tim Means.
I can't even remember who I picked in this fight the first time around. But it was a back and forth fight as it played out. I think both of these guys have very clear advantages over the other. Oliveira with big single moments and the control that he gets off of those. So basically scoring, Oliveira tends to win fights by scoring big and then taking you out of the position to score back. And often that means, you know, getting in on a takedown, controlling you, and then just sort of beating you up from top position, or it means landing a big flashy counter on the feet. More and more these days, though, his goal seems to be to get his opponents to the ground. And I think that's a wise strategy against Tim Means, whose only real weakness is probably his wrestling. It's not terrible, but he's easier to take down than he is to outstrike. And so it makes sense for Oliveira to use his size and strength and his decent wrestling ability to get Means down. In the last fight, of course, he did get back up. Means managed to get up and then take Oliveira down and then started to do some good damage from top position before landing those two illegal knees that caused the fight to be a no contest. So it would seem to suggest that Means is scrappy enough to probably pull away from Oliveira down the stretch. I mean, even in that fight, they didn't get a chance to throw much, but I'm pretty sure Means just about tripled Oliveira's strike output and matched him for takedowns. So if Oliveira is not going to dominate Means on the ground, can he really outstrike him for volume on the feet? Like I don't doubt that he can land some really big shots, and he may get lucky and hurt Tim Means, but most likely Means is the one managing distance and landing the volume and putting combinations together and controlling the fight, where Oliveira is just hoping for these big moments. So I'm going to go with Tim Means by decision here.
Yeah, one of the major problems Alex Oliveira has had and is going to continue having, I think, is that he's really tough, and he's much better athlete and stronger fighter than people think he is. But he's not actually a great technical fighter anywhere. And it means that he can really, and maybe this is also to his detriment as part of that, is that he can be really easily scared off of his game. Like if Alex Oliveira comes out to strike and you land 2 hard shots on him, he will immediately start grappling. And that is what he will be doing for as long as he can. And if he tries to grapple with you and you shut him down and you reverse position, land a few hard shots, you take him down, he will immediately go back to trying to strike with you. Like, there's no dedication towards any angle. And that can be a good thing for some fights. It can be a bad thing for others. And especially the further up the chain you go, the more elite the competition, it's kind of a worse thing. Because you don't, you need to show, like, you need to have that dedication of, like, I know I can get my striking game going. I know I can make this work.
Yeah.
Because the fighters you're facing are going to be too good. They're too well-rounded for you to just be like, oh, well, that didn't work. I guess I'll go back to trying this now. And well, that
kind
didn't
of like
work.
one of those fighters we've talked about often who's kind of a slave to well-roundedness. Like Tim Means is well-rounded, but it's like they're little flashes of other things mixed into his general game plan. And Oliveira always has like the feel of a guy who is willing to abandon something entirely that isn't working and try something totally unrelated.
Yeah, like to beat Tim Means classically, you've either had to do one of two things. You have to either be able to bullshit him into complacency because he has this habit of fighting down to the level of his competition, and especially to just letting people off the hook. His fight with Mauricio Alejandro Jr. was a terrible shitfest of Tim Means just letting somebody off the hook who he was way, way better than everywhere. He won by split decision, and it was just like, you hit harder, you have faster hands, you are bigger and stronger and a better wrestler and a better grappler, and you're just watching this dude and letting rounds go incredibly close. And, that's also the problem he had with Neil Magny, too, and Danny Castillo and Jorge Masvidal, is he just tends to, if you let him watch, he'll just watch. He'll just sit and watch, or he used to. He's gotten a lot better about it lately. And the other way to beat him is the Matt Brown way, which is just to be actually a lot better at him in a place that he really wants to fight, which is the clinch. Matt Brown is just a better clinch fighter, and Tim Means could not get over that idea. It was just like, no, I'm going to keep going back to this clinch, and I'm going to keep testing it. Which, like I say, it's kind of the stick-to-itiveness thing. You have a game that you like and that you implement, and that's your game, and you do it.
And that may be a good thing against Oliveira. Like, even if the strength of Oliveira makes him dangerous in the clinch, it might actually affect him mentally if Tim Means is just continually trying to prove that he's actually the better guy in that range when Oliveira's already mentally jumped over to what other different things he can start to try.
And, Tim Means is 3 inches taller than Oliveira and has doesn't have a reach advantage because Oliveira is built like a freak, but he's taller and bigger. And he's even said, in recent interviews, he's been like, I was in the clinch with that guy. I felt way stronger. So he feels confident there that he can push Oliveira around. And otherwise, like, catching Tim Means, if you give Tim Means a hard, scrappy fight and you try to brawl him, that tends to bring out the best version of him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that Tim Means has never been knocked. He's never been knocked out. He was injured in his third pro fight, and that's his only TKO on record.
He was stunned by Matt Brown before getting submitted, but everybody gets stunned.
Yeah. And so Oliveira, even catching Tim Means, if he's brawling in there with him, like I'm watching that fight, I watched that fight on replay, and Means was way faster in the pocket and a way better combination puncher and rocked Oliveira several times standing.
I think it's because the difference in approach. Means doesn't try to really put any pop into anything. Everything is just like straight down the pipe. Just get it to the target quickly, and it'll wear on him eventually. Oliveira is all about the big flash, the big pop from one big strike, and I don't see that really working that well against Means.
Yeah, he either has to lull Means into a really terrible decision where Means gives away rounds, and Oliveira can't fight like that, so that's not really a possibility. Or he has to just absolutely catch him with something unbelievable. And Oliveira could. He has the wild dynamicism that you don't expect. He caught him with a spinning back kick that crumpled Means, folded him up, and had him backing against the fence to the liver. But Means fought right back through it. You give Means a dogfight, and he will absolutely charge in and make sure that you pay for it. And I don't think Oliveira has the heart, the ability to stick to a plan that's working well enough to fight through that.
The discipline.
Yeah, he doesn't have the discipline where if he hurts Means and Means comes back and nails him with like an uppercut and 2 elbows, Oliveira's going to be like, oh, I guess I better grapple. It's like you hurt him. You were having some success.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm taking Tin Means and probably by TKO in round 3. Late TKO, I think his volume will just turn it up.
I can definitely see it happening.
You already talked about this too, didn't you? Or did you?
Yeah. I have Means by decision.
Okay. The odds on that fight, Tim Means is the favorite, opening at minus 165 now to minus 244. Oliveira opening at plus 125 now to plus 199. I think those odds are about right at this point. I think Means deserves to be a decided, solid favorite. Just because the fighting style, the matchup here, I think really favors him. And that brings us to women's bantamweight bout. Bethe Correia versus Marion Reneau. And Correia, this is a lot. This is basically to me, this is Prazeres Burkman with much less. It's a much less dominant Prazeres, but the fundamentals of the matchup are such that I can't pick Marion Reneau. Correia is not a good athlete. There's no illusions there.
That's probably the furthest, the area in which she is furthest from Michel Prazeres.
Prazeres is a explosive good athlete. But she's a very busy round winner.
Yeah.
She knows how to stay busy. She knows she's tough. She's hard to knock out. You know, it's Ronda Rousey cranking into a wild hook to knock her out. Nobody else has had any luck doing it. And otherwise, against bigger, better athletes, she has either won or she has come very close to winning. Her only other loss is a split to Raquel Pennington. That was a very tough split. And Marion Reneau is an elite athlete who does not know how to pull the trigger and who does not know how to strike aggressively. Her last fight against Milana Dudieva, which was a stylistic layup, Reneau could not pressure to save her life. When she did, she practically just ran past Dudieva. You know, it's like a drive-by punching combo. And she can't, I think that she just will not, that you can't win rounds that way. So unless she actually shows some initiative and takes Correia down and submits her, which she could do. She's a better athlete. She's a great jiu-jitsu grappler. But unless that happens, Correia is winning.
Yeah, it seems the hopes that most of us, I think, had for Marion Reneau under Rafael Cordero turning into this great women's bantamweight contender they're just never going to be realized. She clearly still has the things that made us think she had potential in the first place. She's compared to Correia, she's definitely a superior athlete. She's got
generally, she's a pretty supernatural, quick dynamic.
Yeah, and you could just compare like the way that she and Correia stand, or the way they carry themselves, the way they move. Reneau has no difficulty in sitting in a low, deep stance and sliding in really quickly, covering distance with these big, deep steps. Like, she doesn't feel off balance when she makes a big movement.
Yeah.
Which I think is usually the sign of a natural athlete. It's just that proprioception, basically, to do something dramatically and sort of scramble your way through it. And Bethe Correia doesn't have that, to the point where she doesn't really take those big steps at all. She doesn't close distance quickly. She doesn't, but that's the good thing, right? She doesn't try to do anything that she's not suited to do. She can take a decent shot. She has good stamina, and she can throw high output. And so that's what she does to beat people. And Marion Reneau's game is nowhere near as well suited to her attributes, where she's just kind of aimless in every single fight. And even in ones like the Dudieva fight, which she basically had every opportunity in the world, it still took her 3 rounds to get Dudieva out of there, even though Dudieva did nothing in that entire fight. And then against Ashley Evans Smith, a fight which Reneau probably should have won, she still completely took her foot off the gas after really hurting Ashley Evans Smith in the first round and kind of having her way with her. She just sort of let her back into the fight and just picked shots with her at range rather than pressuring. And I think part of it's because, as you said, she can't really pressure. Reneau is really reliant on sort of long round kicks and straight punches. And these are not things that work in the pocket. The only way you're going to get this to work on somebody is if you run straight forward and they run straight back, which is what happened against Ashley Evans Smith, but isn't really going to work against Bethe Correia, who's much more likely to just sort of sit down.
Oh, we lost Connor. Should hopefully be right back. Everybody hold on. Hey, there he is.
Sorry, I'm back. I was saying Bethe Correia is not likely to do a lot of runnings back in straight lines. She doesn't act like a fighter who needs to create space and run away and move around a lot. She's more likely to just plant her feet, bend her knees a bit, and try to crack Reneau on the way in with like 3 or 4 tight punches. Punching mechanics, not perfect, not a ton of power in what Bethe Correia does compared to Reneau, but she will keep plugging away, throwing more, and I think she will probably win a close decision against Reneau, because I don't know that Bethe at this point can really win anything other than close fights. But, if she's going to be in close fight after close fight, then she's second only to Rocky Pennington as far as winning those fights.
Yeah, and I think, too, just her ability to sit down and put some volume out there may be enough to just scare Reneau off throwing altogether.
Yeah. If anyone goes for a takedown in this fight, by the way, it'll probably be Bethe Correia, because she has been mixing them in. And that may, in fact, be Reneau's one real opening to finish, because she's got a pretty venomous guard. But
she's got a great guard game. That's, you're betting on a Hail Mary sub, basically.
Yes. Basically, yeah. And Correia, I think, is well trained. She's disciplined. She knows what she's doing. She keeps a pretty cool head in the fight. So, I thought she performed very well, for example, against the boos and jeers of the Cleveland crowd when she was at UFC 190, no, 201, 203. 203 was in Cleveland. She did well against a hometown crowd. I doubt that Marion Reneau is going to be able to scare her off in Brazil.
No. Reneau opened at -135, now to -123. Correia opening at -105, now to +101. Correia's not worth betting on. She's too underwhelming as a winner. But there's certainly no reason Reneau should be a favorite in this fight. Reneau should actually, she fights like Yoel Romero if you stripped all the offensive parts out of his game.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. The ability to just put you away at any moment.
Yeah. So, all right. That brings us to a flyweight bout. Jussier Formiga versus Ray Borg.
Oh, boy. See what I'm talking about? These fights are all hard to pick. They're all really, really hard to wrap your head around. This one is such a pick-em to me. Ray Borg's looked really good since moving to Jackson Winklejohn. He looked pretty phenomenal in that fight against What was his last fight? Against Louis Smolka.
Louis Smolka.
Yeah, like he just dominated Louis Smolka, which looks bad for Smolka since he's now, I think, 2 losses in a row, but he was 4 wins in a row before that, was really making his way to the top of this division, and Borg just chewed him up. No difficulty whatsoever. Outstruck him, took him down with ease, out-scrambled him. Borg has a little bit of that Yahya-esque grappling to his game. He's like I would call him an anti-scrambler in a lot of ways, because while he does really well in scrambles, he only really, if he can avoid it, or if he's able, he only allows scrambles that he wants. So he will typically get in a really strong position, classic jiu-jitsu style, and then let you move to get into his next position. But these only look like scrambles because Ray Borg basically already knows what he's going to do next. He's just like giving you one option, watching you take it, and then countering you. And so it's really hard to shake Borg off if you are a scrambly grappler. How does that match up against Jussier Formiga, who is another very traditional jiu-jitsu guy with a couple of nice scrambling tricks of his own? For example, how quickly he jumps to the back in the midst of a scramble is, there's probably no one in the division who can do that close to as well as Formiga does it. Maybe the only other contender is Ray Borg, who is also a very good back taker. So you have a really interesting matchup here. I think I kind of have this feeling that Borg is going to underestimate Formiga's grappling. I have a feeling that Ray Borg, who is used to out-grappling everyone he faces, is going to meet Jussier Formiga. I mean, he's talked in interviews about how he came up fighting all these traditional jiu-jitsu guys, and so he knows how to deal with this style of grappling. And I think that's a little worrisome to me, because Formiga, there are levels to this shit. You know what I mean? I think Formiga is really on another level on the ground. And even with his wrestling and takedown defense, is not your typical jiu-jitsu player. You know, he's pretty damn good. And then he's probably at least good enough in the striking to hang with Ray Borg. Borg definitely has added some new tricks. I especially like the way that he will move his head and strike and then move his feet forward as he strikes, not in these big reckless shifts, but these small little lateral steps that let him load up his punches. That's something I think Brandon Gibson at Jackson Wink teaches very well. I've seen it in a lot of his fighters, and I've only started seeing it in Borg since he started working with him. So he's definitely still improving, still young, but I think the experience of Formiga may tell when this one does go to the ground, and I think he will be just crafty enough on the feet to not let Borg sort of bull rush through him. But when I started my Sherdog preview this week and began writing this up, one of the first things I typed in was Ray Borg by decision. So I really don't know. I mean, I flip-flopped on this one already. I don't think it's an unwinnable fight for Borg at all. I just like, I tend to go with the veterans.
Well, I mean, there's one thing I'm going to mention here before we start. Before I start, you've already started, obviously, and finished. But is Henry Cejudo beat Jussier Formiga by split decision.
Yeah.
Split decision. Jussier Formiga has gotten a lot better. He is one of in fact, the most under-recognized fighters for improving, I think.
I've been saying that for a long time. I've been saying that since before his fight with Wilson Hayes, when I thought he was going to out-counterpunch Wilson Hayes, and he did. So, yeah, I've been saying that for a while, that Formiga, he looked bad when he was losing to Dodson and Benavidez back in the very beginning of his UFC run, but he has really put together a consummate game at this point.
He's sort of like Edson Barboza in that way, where like the problems that Formiga has are still the problems he's always had. It's just that he's gotten so much better at dealing with them and mitigating them. And classically, the way that you beat Jussier Formiga is being a powerful, a super athletic wrestler who can out punch him.
It's like a wrestler who doesn't just try to out wrestle him.
Yeah, like you have to be Ian McCall or John Dodson or Joseph Benavidez or Henry Cejudo, otherwise you lose. Like his fight with Dustin Ortiz, the takedown he hit on Dustin Ortiz immediately was just a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
Just took him down with ease and had top position, smothering top position in no time flat. And Borg, he doesn't have enough of the striking tools, I think, to make Formiga think too much on the feet. Formiga has tightened up into a really technical, nuts and bolts Muay Thai game that suits him nicely because it's not overly dynamic or overly inventive, but it really takes advantage of how fast he is, because it's just like sort of very rote, like, you know, do Muay Thai. And he's like, okay, I'm super fast. I can make that work. I can adapt that to a lot of situations because I'm a very fast athlete. And I think because of that, he can do a lot better job dictating Borg's takedown entries than Borg can do dictating Formiga's. And that's really what this fight's going to come down to. Is it's going to come down to a battle of top control and takedown entries and who gets it, because both guys can be lockdown grapplers from top control. And I trust Formiga to be able to dictate that better right now. I mean, just the Scoggins fight we saw with Ray Borg shows me enough that somebody who can outstrike him can dictate the wrestling game against him.
Yeah, the problem with Formiga still is the one that I don't know he'll ever fix, or even cover up the way he has a lot of his other flaws, is that he's still not an urgent fighter.
No,
he fights like he's already the champion, where he's not out there trying to seize opportunities. He's deflecting everything. Like his whole aim is to deflect, to not get hurt, to not get taken down, to not be controlled, and not to put himself at too much risk. And that was enough against Wilson Hayes. But maybe only because Wilson Hayes is kind of chinny and not super confident when he starts to lose. Whereas the new Ray Borg, with his striking being improved, really reminds me a lot of Wilson Hayes. And that fight clearly won by Formiga, but still close. So, which is why I have questions. Like, if Wilson Hayes had a solid chin and didn't give a damn about being hit, would it change that matchup fundamentally? Just because Hayes was the one who was trying to lead more and do more, and I think Borg will be that person in this fight. But
it is also worth noting, though, that since losing that. Like, Borg has never won a fight against anyone who could really strike with any ability at all.
Yeah.
Like, Louis Smolka is probably the best striker that Ray Borg has beat. And Smolka is really a weird fighter. Just a weird fighter in general. Like, striking is the part of Smolka's game that he does the least well.
Yeah, I mean, Smolka's a guy who is, I don't know, super athletes who have a very clear idea of what to do tend to beat him. Like, if Borg is compared to Wilson Hayes, wouldn't Wilson Hayes run through Louis Smolka with no trouble? Yeah, he would. So, yeah, it's tough to draw anything from Borg's recent fights. You just have to look at him and the improvements he's making, which is why I do worry for Formiga's sake. But it's kind of one of those where I have to see him beat it before I can call it.
So Formiga opened at -130 and is now up to +105. And Borg opened at -110 and is now up to -128. Formiga is worth a bet as an underdog. There's no reason to think of Formiga as an underdog in this fight.
Yeah, that is a little surprising to me.
Like, Ray Borg's best win is Louis Smolka. And Jussier Formiga's best wins are Zach Makovsky, Wilson Hayes, Dustin Ortiz, Scott Jorgensen,
Chris Carriasso. I mean, there's a lot of good wins that he's gotten in the UFC.
Yeah, Formiga is and even in his losses, Jussier Formiga he's been hurtable in his losses. He's been knockoutable, but only by John Dodson and Joseph Benavidez.
Yeah.
And nothing about Borg suggests that he hits like that.
And a lot of that, too, is the Benavidez fight, I think, is the one that really prompted Formiga to take his striking more seriously. Yeah. So I think, again, as with a lot of these things, it's the mental side of it that takes over. Is not so much that he's really easy to hurt,
no,
physically, but that he was really easy to take the fight out of. You know, it's really easy to turn him into somebody who could be hurt by hitting him with one clean shot. It doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Formiga's a lot more calm and collected.
Yeah,
sometimes to his detriment.
Yeah, I would think that Formiga should be a reasonable favorite, not huge, but seeing him as an underdog doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, that brings us to Edson Barboza versus Beneil Dariush. And love this fight. It's a great fight.
What's not to love?
This is a weird one. Because as Dariush's career has gone on, it's become clearer that like what makes him the best version of himself as a fighter is his confidence in his kickboxing.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a pretty decent wrestler, and of course, you know, he's a very good grappler. But in MMA, he's not actually that great a wrestler and grappler. Like, he's not bad, but Michael Chiesa handled him. Like, you know, Dariush couldn't help himself. It was like he was clearly just plunking Chiesa in the striking battle. And it was like, oh, I'll take this guy down. And then Chiesa just strangled him.
Wasn't it more like Dariush was maybe a little overconfident in his takedown, and Chiesa got like one opening to take his back? I don't recall Chiesa really.
I think that Dariush kept putting himself in trouble needlessly. Like, he was not winning that ground battle that he was initiating.
Yeah, I mean, at the same, you could also say maybe, as I recall, he wasn't really losing it until he lost. You know, very suddenly, he wasn't really. He's
still the kind of fight. Like, I guess I would say with his accolades, like the idea that he came in with as his great black belt.
Yeah.
For him to lose that way is still a real embarrassment. And
he did outgrapple Jim Miller for 3 rounds.
He did, but Jim Miller is also...
It's also Lyme's disease, Jim Miller. So
yeah, and has a habit of fading and being... Like, Jim Miller can be out-grappled, like he has been, you know.
I mean, I'm just not willing to call it embarrassing necessarily yet, just because, you know, Michael Chiesa, let's be real, RNC King, we know this to be true. Yeah. I think anybody who tangles with Michael Chiesa on the ground, he has a weird knack for finding that one submission in MMA that I think he would surprise a lot of very good grapplers.
I'm just, like, Dariush came in, you know, he had a win over Charlie Brenneman and a loss to Ramsey Nijam, both really quick. And then he suddenly got like 2 takedowns on Tony Martin, won that fight by sub. 3 takedowns on Carlos Diego Ferreira, won that fight by decision. A takedown on Crookshank to win by sub. A couple of takedowns on Miller. And then the only takedown he's gotten since that Jim Miller fight is over Michael Chiesa. That's it. He has not otherwise landed a single takedown in his last 4 fights.
And against Rashid Magomedov, he almost didn't seem to really want the takedown. He almost just wanted to close Magomedov down and make him work to defend it. So maybe he just doesn't even care to grapple that much anymore.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm seeing, is that like he's a fighter that really wants to strike. And I think that is going to be what is kind of the crux of his downfall here against Barboza, because Dariush he's a much better striker than I would have given him credit for. He's got a great natural feel for timing. He's got good power. He's got great confidence in his striking. He's not still the fastest striker out there. And I get the feeling at elite levels that is going to, like, I keep coming down to the speed matchup against Barboza. If he's not going to find if he can't match Barboza for speed, I don't think the modern Edson Barboza is going to be flustered by Dariush being confident and there. because, I mean, Barboza, like the guys he's lost to. I mean, first of all, they've been fights that recently he's been handling really well. Donald Cerrone, he was absolutely handling before getting clipped and choked out. And Tony Ferguson, he looked great for a lot of that fight.
He was even very competitive with Michael Johnson.
He was very competitive with Michael Johnson, and Ferguson and Johnson especially have fast hands.
Yeah.
Very fast hands. And I see this being more of the Anthony Pettis, Gilbert Melendez thing where it's, and Anthony Pettis has fast hands too, where it's like even somebody who is confident and who knows how to stand in and who knows how to keep going after him isn't beating Edson Barboza anymore without having the speed to really hang with him. And I don't think Dariush has that. And I don't think that knocking out James Vick or being able to stifle a very stifleable Rashid Magomedov really shows that.
Yeah, Edson Barboza's speed has always been a big element of his success, but I think it's the fact that he's become a lot calmer and more disciplined that has allowed him to make the most of that speed, because he is, as you said before, essentially the same exact fighter he was when he came into the UFC, at least as far as, what he wants to do to people. It hasn't really changed.
No.
He even still has the tendency of like deciding to go to war a little bit and trade with somebody to scare off somebody who's starting to get after him. But he does it a lot better now than he used to. Barboza used to do this thing where he would, the person would close down the distance, and every great outfighter runs out of space at some point. You can't back up. The guy's right in front of you. You got to step in and clinch. You got to try to take him down, or you got to get in there and nail him with a few hard shots so you can then pivot out and get back to open space. Barboza chooses the latter. He likes to go in there and counter in an exchange and then pivot out off of that landed punch. He used to do a lot of watching his work after that would happen. So he'd land like this lightning quick punch. He's not a huge knockout artist with his hands. And so the speed would be impressive, but his opponent would still be throwing. And then Barboza would be caught hanging, where he was sort of waiting to see what the result of this punch was, rather than just immediately executing another action, another strike or a defensive action. Now he does that. So now when he's in there and Gilbert Melendez hurts him with a right hand and he has to fight back, he is hitting him with 2 shots at a time and angling after every single one. Punch, punch, roll under, punch, punch, roll under, jab, leg kick, get out of dodge. You've made your point. You've slowed Melendez down again. You're no longer in danger. It's perfect. I mean, it works really well. Barboza still has that problem with his chin, but he has designed a style really to perfectly suit what he wants to do. And he's also better than ever at stuffing takedowns too. I mean, his takedown defense was pretty beautiful in the Gilbert Melendez fight, and it has looked that way for quite a while. So then what we have is Beneil Dariush. We have 2 guys here with suspect chins, neither of whom, as I said before, fight like they have bad chins. So that's a good thing for them. But it's probably more damaging for Beneil Dariush in this matchup than for Edson. Because for Beneil Dariush, not recognizing that you may be susceptible to counters means running into those counters sometimes. Barboza is very accurate, hits really nice angles, and never waits around long enough to get hit back, or it rarely does these days, which encourages his opponents to keep chasing after him, rush in and get nailed, and then you're chasing after him again, which is both very damaging, but also very disheartening. And if Beneil Dariush runs into that over and over and his confidence does start to go, then that's a lot of what makes him effective as a fighter, is just being willing to go in there and mix it up. Without that, I'm not sure he can match Barboza for technique or discipline. So while I wouldn't be surprised if Dariush just survives some early onslaughts and starts to pour it on and the pressure gets to Barboza later, I think most likely Barboza stings Dariush up pretty badly for the first 2 rounds and maybe even walks him into something that knocks him out in the second or third. Barboza is not a huge puncher, but vicious kicks, and when Dariush is lunging in and walking right into a left hook or a straight right, the chances of him getting badly hurt go up greatly. So I'm actually going to say Barboza by a late knockout.
Yeah, I can see that. I wouldn't be surprised. And yeah, it's just sort of the shift of Dariush toward, like, he's become a good striker. It's not a bad shift.
No, he's very capable.
It is a shift towards being a striker and not not really turning to the grappling and wrestling game much at all.
He may still have some success pushing through that boxing range and into the clinch, because that's what Barboza wants, is for you to get frozen in mid-range where he can throw his combinations and then get back out. Dariush likes to push through and grab the clinch. He's shown some real talent for that position. I mean, like a lot of Cordero fighters, it's a lot of just double collar tie and knees.
Yeah.
But he's also really good at catching people on the break with his punches. Does not tend to let you escape any clinch tie up unscathed. Doesn't let go without first paying you a little punishment.
Yeah, if he were faster, I would be more
sure
on that. Is like he can really lock Barboza down over and over again, but Barboza's speed is just
it's too easy to see him running circles around Dariush.
Yeah. Odds on this fight: Edson Barboza is the favorite, opening at -180, still at -180. Beneil Dariush opening at +140, now out to +151. I think those odds are just about right. Dariush is a dangerous fighter. There's always the chance that maybe he really focuses a game plan right around beating Barboza, around pressuring in the clinch and then working takedowns and seeing if he can out-grapple him and making this fight a little something more uncomfortable for Barboza. But I think it's a matchup that favors Barboza generally, so I got to pick him here. I like the odds on it. I don't think there's necessarily a lot to them. Maybe under 2.5 is +175-ish. So if you think that Barboza can finish, or that the way that the fact that both guys are chinny, that might be the bet to make.
Maybe, yeah. Neither of them are amazing finishers, though. That's the thing. Both guys chinny, but neither one, even against chinny people, is particularly consistent with knockouts. So, I don't know. I don't think it's a great fight to bet on because the odds are pretty spot on.
Yep. That brings us to a light heavyweight bout: Mauricio Shogun Rua versus Gian Villante.
Well, Gian Villante probably knocks Shogun out in a very depressing fashion. It's gonna suck.
Here's the only question. The only question you have to answer: how confident, on a scale of 1 to 10, are you that Gian Villante wins this fight?
Does it seem empirically like the most likely outcome? Yes.
Am I confident?
Am I confident? 5. Like, I don't know. Shogun he's a crafty old dude at this point. That's all he has to offer. He's got some power still. He has been through enough tough spots that he's no longer really scared about getting hurt. He gets hurt more easily than ever, but he's also really good at surviving and fighting his way back in and staying dangerous. And a slow, plodding Shogun is not as dangerous as he used to be, but it's still something. It's enough. And Gian Villante is, an inconsistent guy. I think he's had good moments lately where he has looked to improve on a lot of his bad habits. It used to be really easy to turn him into a reckless brawler, and it's not so much anymore. A little more put together, a little better with his stalking and keeping himself measured and not just completely exhausting himself by throwing bombs at the first opportunity. So I'm sure that's still in Gian Villante's soul, that tendency. And Shogun
got clubbered a few times by Saperbek Safarov.
Yeah, I mean, it's still there. So it's probably going to be Shogun out wrestling Gian Villante for 3 rounds. Just hitting single leg after single leg.
Yes.
And just sitting in half guard.
You know what I would love so much is if Shogun got a knee bar from deep half guard after taking Gian Villante down and then getting out scrambled, and then Shogun rolls for the knee bar. Oh,
even though he has, I think, 1 knee bar win, And it was like way back. What was it against Kevin Randleman? Let's see. He knee-barred Kevin Randleman in 2006.
And since then, nobody has ever shut up about his deep half.
It's the only leg lock he has, and it's the only one he goes for, and it's the only position from which he knows to go for leg locks is from deep half guard. But it would be the apotheosis of Shogun into MMA legend status if he really just finally hit that knee bar that Joe Rogan's been calling for the last 5 years of his UFC career. Yeah, I'm going to go with John Villante by like a round 1 knockout, but I don't know. It's the worst fight on the card, and not even because it's not well matched. It makes total sense. It's just a weird bummer. It's a light heavyweight fight, so.
Yeah, I was watching John Villante's fight with Saparbek Safarov, and I was just like, nothing about this makes me confident that Villante wins against Shogun. Nothing.
I love John Villante though. He's like this goofy dude, bro, who's, I don't know, he's not a grown, mature man, and I guess you could be snobbish at him about that he just probably wants to play Call of Duty all day and get drunk every weekend, but also he totally reminds you of probably most of the guy friends that we all had in high school and college, so.
I like to think of him as Chris Weidman's id. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah, he's a non-married, non-father Chris Weidman. He is Chris Weidman's. Again, we're getting into the divorced, sexualized readings that we were talking about before the show. But John Villante is like the foil in the movie about Chris Weidman's life, who represents the reckless freedom Chris Weidman thinks he wants.
Yep,
that's a perfect way to look at him as a person.
It is.
I like that.
So yeah, I mean, like Villante, because I mean, so much of watching the Safarov fight too is like watching him mind his P's and Q's against Safarov.
Yeah,
and then like just getting nailed with something random. So
yeah,
I'm picking Villante too, and probably by first round TKO. But the further this fight goes, the more it just turns into like this. It turns into this Riddler themed enigma, like green question mark octagon, where you're just like, what mysterious riddle will I get next? Will it be Shogun by KO? Maybe. So I'm picking Villante just off not being as old or shot as Shogun, but that's it. That is all.
Remember when John Villante was being hailed as like a serious prospect at either heavyweight? He's the new who's the guy who was in that role? He's the new Brandon Vera, basically.
Oh yes.
Just like a complete letdown because we're not allowed to have good prospects at light heavyweight and heavyweight.
Brandon Vera did actually like win an actually big fight though to get that moniker.
Yeah, I mean John Villante had like some solid wins in Strikeforce.
His best Strikeforce win is Trevor Smith.
Yeah, there's not much really.
No,
but that just goes to show what actually, passes for.
Shogun would be the best win of Villante's career by a mile.
Even at this point in his life, like even a 36-year-old Shogun, 35-year-old.
Yeah. Unquestionably. Without even a moment's hesitation.
That means Shogun's going to win. I mean, it's being offered up on a platter. There's no better time to get the biggest win of your career for John Villante, and Shogun's going to knock him out.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, okay. Shogun is the favorite. Minus 175, opening at minus 175, now to minus 141. Villante is the underdog, plus 135, now to plus 117. Oh, for fuck's sake. There's no betting on this fight. You don't bet on John Villante as an underdog against Shogun. You don't.
You could maybe get him by knockout?
Under a round and a half, plus 140.
That's not too bad.
That might be the way to go.
Gian Villante
inside the distance
plus 220.
220 plus 220. That might be. But
I mean, if he does 10 to win by KO and Shogun does 10 to get knocked out these days.
Yeah.
So, but what's Shogun inside the distance?
Shogun inside the distance is plus 145. Less.
If you're going to make the bet, I would go for Villante by KO. But I don't know.
Fight doesn't go to decision is minus 175 even. So I don't know.
Even that, like, it could be a terrible decision.
Yeah. Ugh. All right.
Wretched fight.
To the main event, Vitor Belfort versus Kelvin Gastelum. And unless Kelvin Gastelum has dramatically changed the fighter that he is, and unless Vitor Belfort has dramatically changed the fighter that he is, Kelvin Gastelum is going to put a stomping on Vitor Belfort, and that is the end of it. Do you have additional things to add to this?
There are some wrinkles that I see here. Because
all right, wrinkle it up.
I don't think Vitor Belfort is done. In fact, I don't think he's close to being done. I think he's still just Vitor Belfort.
Yeah, no, it's not a doneness. It's just
limitedness. But even there, like, Vitor still very fast. Like, post TRT Vitor is still very fast and powerful. Yep. Still has that expanded arsenal that he picked up during his time away from the UFC. He's got the kicks and everything, in addition to having a pretty solid boxing game. And Kelvin Gastelum is quite hittable. And so I can see early where Kelvin Gastelum, who will probably want to pressure Vitor Belfort, walks into some really dangerous spots. And if he strikes with range at Vitor, even if he doesn't get finished in an early exchange, say he gets clipped and it forces him to decide to fight at long range for a little bit, Vitor's really dangerous there. If you give him his space, he can catch you. So I think that there's a chance here that this could be Vitor's last hurrah, and the fact that he is sort of a small light heavyweight at middleweight, whereas Kelvin Gastelum is a normal welterweight at middleweight, does help him there. It may help to mitigate some of the wrestling that Gastelum will want to bring to the table. And it may also have an effect on power. That we don't really know if Kelvin Gastelum can crack Vitor Belfort the way that even that Gegard Mousasi does, or that Jacare does. I know that he probably carries more power relative to his opponents than Gegard Mousasi, but he's at middleweight. We haven't really seen him beating up good middleweights yet and cracking them.
Kennedy is a good middleweight.
Yeah, I mean, Kennedy also, after a long layoff, looked totally shot in that fight and was spent the last 2 rounds utterly exhausted. So you can give some credit for that to Gastelum, but still, I haven't seen him hit a fresh middleweight with one left hand and hurt them, which is something he could do a little more often at welterweight.
You're not going to see it after. This fight's not going to tell you that either.
Right? Because if he does hit Vitor, even then I'll be like, well, was it because Vitor or? Yeah. But I think that maybe that suggests that Vitor may have an easier time taking the shots from Gastelum than he does from, say, Chris Weidman. So, like, the difference in size between Chris Weidman and Kelvin Gastelum is probably pretty dramatic. Just the difference in mass. So there's something there. Gastelum is the only person you can pick in this fight. Volume, aggression, the ability to fight after the first round. These are things that Vitor still struggles with all the time, with a few weird exceptions. But it'll be a dangerous first round for Gastelum. I'll say that. I'll say Kelvin Gastelum by second round TKO, but the first round, I don't think it'll be as easy for him as many are expecting, or at least there's a strong chance that Vitor will surprise him a few times.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think you're a jerk for giving people some weird false hope here.
Well, nobody likes Vitor anyway, right? Like, I'm the only person who's a fan of Vitor Belfort. Everyone else.
I like Vitor. I do. But, the last time he won a fight outside of round 1 was his 2013 TKO of Michael Bisping, and the last time before that was Terry Martin in 2008.
That he won a fight
outside of round 1.
Yeah, that's why I think if it goes past round 1, Gastelum will definitely have the shot.
And Kelvin Gastelum has never been seriously hurt in a fight.
Well, that's not true. He was
Well,
knocked down. He was staggered once and then knocked down by Rick Story.
okay. Yeah.
He was, I think there was another one that I was thinking of too, that he got stunned. Oh, he got stunned pretty badly by Tyron Woodley. Granted, Tyron Woodley, but
Yeah.
he did get rocked pretty badly in that fight too.
He's never been finished, though.
No, he's tough. He's definitely tough.
And he's faced a number of really hard punchers. So it's not like he's never been finished and he's never had his chin tested.
Yeah, and there's a very strong chance that just by being aggressive, he shuts Vitor down and puts him into a shell and takes over quickly. I just think that Vitor, as we know, is still very dangerous in the first round because he's not really degraded that much. So
he is, but I think I think just noting that Vitor Belfort is dangerous in the first round sort of missells his chances. Like,
I guess. I mean, I think in particular against Gastelum because Gastelum's pretty hittable. He really is.
Yeah, he is.
He doesn't move his head that well.
He's Mike Perry 3.0.
Right. He comes in on a very straight line with his head right up, and he's got a big head and is much more offensively focused. So I'm just saying that in particular in this matchup, I think Gastelum
could walk right into something.
Yes, I think Vitor is riskier for Gastelum than he would be for a lot of other equally tenured middleweights, but only in the way that he always is dangerous, which is in the first few minutes of the first round.
Yeah, I would also say, too, that Belfort, because when we're talking about like Gastelum's power and stuff like that, the problem for Belfort still isn't and has never been that he's getting hit really hard. And so he doesn't, and he can't take hard shots. It's that he gets pressured and taken down or hit at all, and then he just loses all confidence in his ability to fight.
His ego can't take hard shots. His chin is fine. It
doesn't really matter if Gastelum can't hit super hard if he can do enough to just pressure him.
Yeah, which is like, again, I'm picking Gastelum. I think he will pile on and beat Vitor up. I just think that first round, there are some definite, clear opportunities for Vitor.
Belfort always has an opening.
Yes.
If I'm calling this fight and telling, I think this is a fight that it's reasonable to be pretty confident about.
Sure, I agree. Yeah, I'm not worried that Vitor is going to win. I just think, if I'm Gastelum, I'm cautious. So I'm conscious of that.
Like Anderson Silva, the legend of Vitor Belfort far precedes him at this point.
Yeah, Vitor been fighting since what? 2096.
96.
He may be that may be the oldest debut of anyone in the UFC right now. I mean, it's very likely that it is.
Yeah, since Dan Henderson retired, it is.
I think it probably is. 96 is crazy.
Actually, Henderson might have even been 97. So, yep.
21 years ago, man.
Yep.
That is insane.
Gastelum is the favorite, opening at -315, now to -385. Belfort, the underdog, +230, opening at +235, now to +303. Those odds are about right to me. Belfort has just enough of a slight chance to keep it from being a ridiculous over-the-moon long shot, but it should be a long shot.
This is also, he was supposed to be retired after his last fight, as an aside, and I think accepted this because it's in his hometown, which could mean that he's done with fighting and he's just trying to get that last paycheck, or he might be really fired up to go out on a high note in his hometown.
There were a lot of rumors that he was going to say he was going to retire after his last fight, but then the thing that he actually ended up saying after his last fight is, I need to learn to fight like my old self again, and I'm going to keep fighting until I find that.
Oh, so never mind. Vitor Belfort, still trying to be Vitor Belfort.
Yeah, it was more of an insane, I will keep doing this until I recapture my youth, basically.
You get the feeling, though, that Vitor is a guy you can never... I think he gets so emotionally fired up about everything. You can never trust what he's saying in one moment to hold for the future.
Oh, sure. No, he could absolutely get brutally KO'd here and walk away. I mean, you don't know. But he could also easily be the crazy dude who's fighting when he's 50. I
kind of hope so. Like, I don't know. Old Vitor is still good to me. It's still interesting. It's still tense enough to be worth watching.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's nothing on this fight card that isn't interesting to watch. It's just
Yeah.
the last two have a. If they go the way they could be a bit snuffy, you know.
Yes. They're not fights that either way will really make you that happy to have seen them, but you will be glued to the screen while they're taking place.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneTime. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com in our various capacities. If you're watching this video on YouTube, give it a thumbs up. That helps us a ton. And subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Hit that bell too. That's a new thing on YouTube. If you want notifications, hit the bell. Don't just hit subscribe, because otherwise you won't get them.
Yeah, hit the bell. Subscribe to MMANation.com, DOTCOM. Hit the bell to get notifications. That way we will tell you, or you will be told when we are back on. And I know you can't manage to possibly live a week without us. We will be back next week for an episode of the MMA Depressed Us, I believe. Yep. Or no. We will be back next week for the London event in the O2 Arena. We got one more fight week next week, and then we'll have a couple weeks off to be doing the MMA Depressed Us. But Manoa versus Anderson is next week. So we'll be back with the Care Don't Carry If I Did It, Vivisection, Heavy Hands, all that good stuff. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you next time.